The importance of sleep is what we are going to cover today. And I think a lot of the time, it's one of those things that always gets pushed to the back burner, right? It's one of those things where it's like, yes, I know I need to get a handle on my sleep. Yes, I know I need more. But for whatever reason, it's always a bit of a struggle. And particularly here, I think in the society that we live in, everything is kind of geared towards nightlife, staying up late. I mean, for example, like after this call, I'm going to go to the F1 track and start a run at 9:15, and I imagine I'll probably finish and get home at midnight. So this day totally ruins my sleep. But there's always things that we can do to balance things out across the course of the week, right? This isn't about turning you into robots or saying no to all social occasions because it might interrupt your sleep, but it's about making sure we can maximize the time you have, the quality of the sleep you have, as well as starting to improve the quantity, how much sleep you are getting. So today, what we'll cover is we'll go into a little bit of the science around sleep. What is the internal body clock that we have, the hormonal balancing act between cortisol and melatonin, sleep stages and the importance of these, because a lot of the time, you may sleep for a certain amount of time, but the quality isn't there. You're not going through the stages of sleep that obviously help you feel rested and recovered. There's probably been times where you've slept for 7, 8, 9 hours, but still feel absolutely wrecked. And that is where the quality of the sleep comes in. We'll touch on how much sleep is optimal, what happens when you don't get enough, and how this often plays out in disrupting whatever fitness pursuits we are on. And then also practical tips on how to improve your sleep and what we can do to start shifting things forward. All right, we've got Saad joining as well. So what we'll start with is this powerful quote. And this really applies to everything in life. And it is from James Clear. If you haven't read his book on atomic habits, we recommend you do so. We talk about him a lot in some of these presentations too. And it's all around you do not rise to the levels of your goals, you fall to the level of your systems. And so when we talk about habits, behaviors, actions, these are the things that ultimately ladder up to your goals, to what you want to achieve, to the result. Myself and Marvin, we often say you behave your way to success, right? And so if you do not have the habits in place, you do not have the systems in place, we can hope all day, we can try all day to sort of hope these things get into place and we hope they resolve. But ultimately, we fall to the level of our habits and our systems. So we need to start with focusing on the behaviors, the habits that ultimately are going to ladder up to where we want to be. And honestly, I'm surprised at how many people we had signed up to this call because it's not sexy. Sleep is one of those things that, we all know we need to get more, but we don't necessarily do anything about it. So that stops today. After this, you're going to be hyped. Maybe not the best thing, hyped to get ready for bed in the evening. One of the things here in Saudi as well is, because it has become the norm, right? Because we're used to it, or because it's been that way since you were a kid, it doesn't necessarily make it right, or that your body is working is fine. And it's just really that the baseline lowers, right? And that comes across everything like fitness as well. If you don't train, your baseline is very low, it's below average. And so you're operating in a sort of a deficit. So the same is true when it comes to sleep. So just because it's something that you've always done, or that your friends do, or your family do, or you're a night owl, or whatever it is, it doesn't mean it is optimal for you and obviously what you want to achieve. Trying, hoping isn't going to cut it when it comes to things that require habits, require shifts in behavior and mindset. We need to put things in place. We need to make sure that what we are doing is what we're implementing is going to obviously help what we're sort of aiming for. And ultimately, like myself and Marvin, a lot of the time when we have conversations with you, we don't want you to simply survive. We don't want you to just get by in life. We don't want you to just go through the motions each day. We really want you to thrive. right? We want you feeling strong. We want you feeling healthy. We want you full of energy. It's not about just getting by. And I think every single one of you who obviously has put time in, dedicating effort, time to yourself within this journey, it's because you want more. It's because you want to feel better, feel stronger, look better, whatever it might be. You're done with just getting by and just, setting or sitting at the baseline. So we're excited to take you through yet another training. And as always, if there are any trainings which come up that you feel we could look at, or any ideas that come up, please do ask, because there's bits maybe around training. We've done stuff around cravings before, calorie deficits. So we're always open to whatever those are. So I thought this would be quite funny in terms of just seeing what are the countries that are performing well when it comes to sleep and maybe not so well. So I don't think there's probably any surprises here. And the percentage is, if the recommended is 7 to 8 hours of sleep, what is the percentage of the population who are getting that? So literally, I would say 1 in 2, or just less than 1 in 2 people in Saudi get sufficient amounts of sleep, which probably isn't a surprise. I know some of you have a Whoop like myself, and I remember listening to a podcast, and they were saying how literally like Qatar, Saudi Arabia, like all of the GCC countries are depressingly low when it comes to what they track in terms of sleep. And to think about that, obviously, people who are wearing a Whoop are more self-conscious than people who aren't. So you've already got a sort of bias in that population. So, just like how steps are low in the kingdom, sleep is poor in the kingdom, it doesn't necessarily mean that that has to be you, right? You can make shifts in your behavior, in your thinking, in your habits to put yourself in a better place and work on that. It's not going to be perfect overnight for sure, but the little things that we can do definitely help. And I know I asked for the biggest struggles that you may have when it comes to getting quality sleep in. A lot of people stress, overthinking, work struggles. Some of you are working nights, and I honestly really feel for one of you who are on the call, Mujtaba, who literally may get several calls a night when they're on call, right, working. So it is tough for sure, but there are things that everyone can do to better optimize these things. So I'm sure each and every one of you, you are not alone in the struggle. So hopefully we can work on some of that today. So I'll pass over to Marvin now, and he can touch on well, some of these bits.
So to kick off here, we've got the 4 rules of survival, right? So if you essentially think about the 4 things that you absolutely need to survive, right? That's air, and that's about roughly 3 minutes of air that if you spend more than 3 minutes without air, right, you're gonna die. If you spend more than 3 days without water, the same goes. Food is approximately 3 weeks, so you could survive up to about 3 weeks with absolutely nothing. And then sleep is 11 days. And when doing research for this call and this presentation, went down a bit of a deep dive on sleep, and yeah, found this really interesting experiment, which was done in the 60s. So this guy called Randy Gardner set a world record of 264 hours or 11 days with no sleep. Imagine that. Like, oh man, you couldn't pay me millions to do this.
Marvin,
Like,
hasn't this been you with Miles? No, not too far
yeah,
off.
not quite 11 days, but yeah, honestly, you couldn't pay me enough to do 11 days with no sleep. But yeah, he was monitored obviously by doctors, researchers, and army lieutenant, because this is such a big deal. And there are a lot of risks involved with doing something so so massive. And so they recognized or noticed that he had severe cognitive decline, extreme mood swings, problems with concentration, paranoia, hallucinations. And interestingly, at one point, they asked him, I think it was day 7 or something, they asked him to count from 100 in like backwards from 100 in sevens, right? So he went 100, 93, and he kept going. And he stopped at 65. And they asked him, why? Why did you just stop? Like he just abruptly stopped. And they asked him why, and he honestly just could not even answer. He just said, I forgot what I was doing. So that just goes to show you what sleep deprivation can do to a person. And of course, I'm sure we've watched all the movies where, people are tortured, and sleep deprivation is one of like the key things for torture to get some answers out of people. And then post-experiment, Randy slept 15 hours on day one. Obviously, he was in a massive deficit. On day two, 10 and a half hours. And then day three kind of started to go back into a normal rhythm. Now, bear in mind, this experiment was done in the 60s. So decades later, in 2007, we're talking 4 decades, 40 years later, he started to suffer the consequences of the experiment with reported chronic insomnia and obviously struggling with his sleep. So if 11 days without sleep can affect you 40 years later, imagine what 2, 3 hours every day consistently for, 60 plus years of your life, how much that's affecting you. So just thought that would be a really interesting little stat that, we could share with you guys.
And I think here, like a lot of the time, what we see with clients is, they work hard during the week or whatever it is, and then they catch up on their sleep at the weekend, maybe on a Friday or something like that, and have excessively sort of long hours in bed. What are your thoughts on that, Marvin?
You're essentially giving yourself jet lag. I mean, it's better than nothing, to be fair. At least you're trying to get some sort of sleep. However, once you've created a sleep deficit, it's just hard to make it up. So, you get what you can get. And of course, we're going to have a deep dive on obviously more tactical stuff. As you guys know, Pete and I love ourselves a bit of tactical steps and next steps in terms of, how to get things done. So, circadian rhythm. So, now we're going to get into the science bit, right? We've obviously just spoken about an experiment that was done, and we're going to get into circadian rhythm, which is essentially your body's 24-hour internal clock. So, if you can obviously see that graph there, there's various things happening at various hours. And we'll do a deeper dive on the hormonal things that are happening. But as we can see, at different times of the day, your body is more responsive or is going to positively respond better to certain things. Of course, we're not, robots, as Pete said in the beginning, so we're not expecting you to be, doing your strength training at exactly what's at 5 p.m. or whatever the case may be, based on, what the science says or the study says. But I think it's just really interesting to understand that our body works on a 24-hour clock. And so it's really important as we dive a little bit deeper into the sleep side of things. So the circadian rhythm itself is controlled by a region in the brain called the hypothalamus. And these rhythms are primarily influenced by light and darkness, but also affected by things like food, stress, physical activity. And obviously, these disruptions to the circadian rhythms lead to sleep disorders, fatigue, depression, obesity, diabetes, and plenty of other health issues. And maybe a simple way to think of circadian rhythm is when the sun rises, it's obviously, the signal for us to get up and start moving and get on with our lives. And then when the sun sets, it's obviously time to start winding down, go to sleep, rest, recuperate, and so on and so forth.
And I think, this from a more, I guess, evolutionary perspective is something that is essentially hardwired into us. For example, we have for what, the last however many, I mean, I'm testing my history here. We haven't been with electricity for a really long time, right? Prior to that, everything was, say, candlelit or with fire. And so the body is naturally wired to have this cycle, right? Where we rest when it's dark and we're up and sort of invigorated when it's light, when it's daytime. And so we as sort of, I guess, as humans can't necessarily adapt to, such a short amount of time with electricity or candlelight or whatever it is. And so the body is still hardwired in that way to respond in such a way. So no amount of, staying up late or whatever it is really going to change what is happening internally. If anything, it's just going to sort of, make it less, well, impact everything happening internally, which we'll get onto in a moment.
And then the hormones that I mentioned in the beginning, we have two main ones that obviously impact sleep. So with that circadian rhythm, you have what's called cortisol, right? Which I'm sure you guys have heard about, maybe on social media or whatever the case may be. And so that is the stress hormone, right? That's the one that's responsible for fight or flight. That's the other sort of name that you might have heard with regards to this hormone. And if we have consistently high or low levels of cortisol, it can lead to, medical conditions. So we want an optimal amount of cortisol, and it sort of starts to rise around the time you wake up. So 5 a.m., 6 a.m., as the sun is sort of rising, we start to see that cortisol, increasing. And then it starts to decline, closer to around 4 or 5 p.m. as the sun is starting to set. And then we have the other one that kicks in, which is melatonin. So they kind of cross paths, right? As you can see in the graph there, they cross paths where one is declining and then the other one is increasing. And melatonin we'll get into shortly. So the functions of cortisol itself are the stress response, which I mentioned earlier, and then metabolism. So it actually regulates, how your body uses glucose for energy. Inflammation, it has anti-inflammatory properties. So helping your body to kind of, not be as inflamed, not feel as like all the pain and all that sort of stuff. So having the right amount of cortisol can actually help with inflammation. It obviously helps with blood pressure as well, helping it maintain certain like good levels and healthy levels of your blood pressure. So it's a very, very important hormone. We need enough of it. We don't need too much, and we obviously don't want too little of cortisol.
And I think the natural path of cortisol, right, is it kind of spikes in the sort of with sunlight. Ooh. It spikes with sunlight. So it starts to increase as we need to wake up, right? It's the alertness hormone, the stress hormone. And then as you see, it stops being, or it sort of reduces how much is being secreted through the course of the day, right? And so if we go back to everyone's comments around what is the biggest struggle with sleep, often it is stress, workload, overthinking, all of these things, which actually increase this level of cortisol that you're having. And so if we think about at night, maybe we get a shitty email, maybe we're working, maybe we've got a big presentation in the morning. What can happen then is that cortisol level is increasing earlier on, right? And so ideally, when we want to be winding down and getting ready for bed, if the cortisol level is high, then it's going to impact A, getting to sleep, and B, staying asleep, right? And having quality sleep. And so a lot of the time, and we'll come onto this later, we want to do things that mitigate or reduce the amount of stress that we're seeing in the evening. Easier said than done, granted, but that's something worth noting here as well, because it will have, as Marvin will go to in a second, it will have a sort of counter effect to really what melatonin is doing at night when it is increasing.
Yeah, so if cortisol is decreasing, melatonin is starting to increase, right? Because as the sun sets, the melatonin starts to come in to help you. It's also called the rest and digest hormone, right? Where it's essentially allowing your body to calm down, to relax, to get the central nervous system to sort of come back to homeostasis, where you're not stressed, where you're not in this fight or flight state. Which makes sense, right? When the sun is sort of setting, we're getting ready to sleep. We're obviously digesting our last bits of food before we get to bed, spending time with family. There's more downtime. So melatonin is starting to increase as that happens. So exposure to light, especially blue, green, and Pete, can you quickly go back to the previous slide? The one on melatonin? Yeah, there we go. Exposure to screens, right? So the TVs, the phones and all that sort of stuff actually inhibits that melatonin production. So if you are still, lo and behold, we're having a Zoom meeting at 8 p.m. So probably not the best ambassadors for melatonin here, but you get the gist. Being on screens at this time when your body's meant to be at peak or getting close to peak melatonin is obviously not ideal, but this is an important topic that we need to understand. Therefore, 8 p.m. it is. Onto the functions of melatonin. So obviously that sleep-wake cycle that we spoke about. So it signals the body that it's time to sleep. So when it starts to rise, and then you hopefully are getting to bed by 9, 10 p.m. when it's starting to peak. It helps with, regulating the circadian rhythm, that bodily internal clock with the light and darkness that we've touched on. It has antioxidant properties, so it actually protects your cells from stress and damage that happens from everyday life, whether it's, the waste that your body builds when you train, or whether it's stress from work or anything of that sort, right? And then it helps actually regulate your mood too. So if you have low melatonin levels, you might actually, struggle with disrupted mood. And there's something actually called seasonal affective disorder, which is quite popular in, again, Pete said he was going to test his history. I'm going to test my geography. That's the north, right? So the Scandinavian type regions, right, where they barely have sunlight for, I think it's their winters. So they actually, and I'm sure in the UK, Pete, you would have experienced this seasonal affective disorder where there's less sunlight. And so, your body's constantly, or you were used to having more sunlight. Now you're switching into winter and then there's less sunlight. Now melatonin is having to be produced a little bit earlier. Do you remember any of that?
Yeah. It's
When
it's a big thing in terms of depression, right? Seasonal affective disorder can lead to depression because your body is not receiving the amount of sunlight that it needs, and it's kind of off cycle, as it were. Equally, you get the effect of vitamin D deficiency as well, which, even to be honest, is not too small a thing here, right? People stay indoors, they don't get their vitamin D and so on. But we digress.
Yes. So I think I'll let Pete take over here, diving into what's actually happening when you're sleeping. So the science behind that.
So we'll kind of just rattle through this a little bit. And ultimately, there's different stages of sleep, right? And really, we want to get into stage three and stage four. The thing is, when we are sleeping, it takes time for our bodies to get into, or our brains rather, to get into these deeper stages of sleep. And so stage one, as you know, you're kind of, drowsy, you're starting to nod off, brain waves slow down, right? All these kind of relate to what is happening with the brain, right? In terms of brain waves. So we start off in that stage one, that light sleep. It's that transition phase between being conscious and unconscious. And then we get into like a deeper light sleep. So a stage two. And this is where our body temperature drops, the brain waves slow. And this is where the initial stages of sort of the benefits take place. It's consolidating memory and all that kind of stuff. So then we get to stage three is down here, which is a deeper sleep. And this is where like more of the good stuff happens, right? Tissue repair, growth hormone is being released, the immune system is being strengthened. This is where the body recovers, right? So if you're breaking it down in your training, this is where you're getting the payback, right? The payback of all the efforts you're putting in. And then stage four, which is this REM sleep, so rapid eye movement sleep, is where further sort of benefits take place. And this is where you kind of get the sort of vivid dreams, your eyes kind of, I don't know if you've ever watched someone sleeping in a totally non-weird, creepy way, but sometimes you see their kind of eyes flicker left to right, up and down, whatever it might be. And this is where the emotional processes, the learning, the creativity, memory consolidation takes place. And so the big thing that I want to take home here for you is the fact that, it's not just, and sorry, just to say here, you go through these stages multiple times a night. So it's not just, stage by stage until you get to stage four and then khalas, that's it. But actually you repeat these stages through the night. And so what we want to avoid is really interruptions in our sleep, right? So if you imagine, you're at home, I don't know, you're trying to sleep, there's noisy neighbors, there's drilling outside, there's all that kind of stuff happening for whatever reason. You really are only going from stage one to stage two in terms of your sleep. Maybe you'll get to stage three, but if you've even slept for 8 hours and you wake up feeling super lethargic and like you haven't even slept, that's because you're not getting into the deeper stages of sleep. So what we're trying to say here is not all sleep is essentially created equal. We want to be getting into stage three, stage four, so that we're really maximizing the benefits of ultimately, what we're working towards here. And then when it comes down to like how much sleep we need, which I think Tasneem, you mentioned earlier in the chat here, I don't think this is a surprise to anyone. Between 7 to 9 hours, this is essentially the average to promote that optimal health. And yes, there are always outliers to this. Some people genuinely are good with like 5, 6, 7 hours, or some people need more, 9, 10 hours. There's always outliers. But for the majority, if we're thinking like a bell-shaped curve, for the majority, 7 to 9 hours is going to be that sweet point. For me, if I get anything less than 7.5 hours a night, I am useless the next day. So you really should know roughly when you feel good when you wake up, when you feel like you haven't had enough sleep. And one thing that you can do actually following this call is to start being more aware of it. And maybe, for the next week, you want to track, what time you're going to bed and what time you're waking up to give you a rough idea around that. And then to be honest, you can probably subtract 20% from that because it takes a bit of time to get to sleep and then you're snoozing in and all that kind of stuff. And I think one of the big things here is it's not just about, I don't know, reaching what you want to achieve or performing at your best. But there have been studies which show that if you are sleeping less than 6 hours, if you are sleeping more than 8 or 9 hours a night, then there is an increased risk in all of these sort of diseases, right? Cardiovascular disease, high blood pressure, cancer, obesity, diabetes, depression, mortality, cognitive impairment, all these sorts of things. So not sleeping enough, it like the outcome of that isn't just tiredness. If you're constantly not getting enough sleep, or if you're oversleeping excessively, then there can actually be further health issues happening down the line. Plus, if we factor on the diet, the lack of movement, all of that kind of stuff, this can be quite a potent issue for a lot of people. So, what happens when you don't sleep? Yes, you may feel and look like that, but the big issue, really, if we're thinking about consistency in everything that you're doing with this fitness journey, ultimately, the big thing to be aware of is tiredness leads to suboptimal decision making based around things like comfort. Okay, so subconsciously, this isn't even you thinking about it, you are going to move less. So your steps are going to decrease. You're going to expend less calories during the day. You're more likely to skip or delay. So you're tired, you're like, ugh, I'll do my training tomorrow. So you miss your training. You seek out that comfort food. High sugar, high fat food becomes much more appealing. There's an over reliance on caffeine, right? So maybe you go from 2 or 3 coffees a day to 4, 5, or 6. Then you're having pre-workout in the evening for your session. And then what that is going to do is ultimately affect the following night's sleep, right? So it becomes a sort of waterfall or a snowball effect here. And then the big one is, we talk a lot about you can't rely on willpower. And so when you aren't sleeping, willpower, like you're not, it's significantly diminished, right? You're then going to have to rely on discipline, which even then takes a hit. So if you can imagine, if you're sleeping suboptimally, all of these things are going to take a hit, and it's going to be that much harder to push yourself, to motivate yourself to do these things. And then to layer on top of that, if you are highly stressed, if your cortisol is through the roof during the day, then all of these things, I swear, are like times 100. Maybe a bit extreme, but all of these things are going to be amplified if we're thinking, okay, you're tired and you're stressed. It's going to be a real struggle. And
And
then other
what's
things.
interesting in here,
Sorry,
Pete,
go.
sorry to cut you off, but what's interesting in here as well, since we're speaking about hormones and getting a little bit sciencey, when your cortisol increases way above what it should be for you to function optimally, you then also get like what Pete mentioned about the cravings and high fat foods and those types of quote unquote comfort foods, and how your body wants more of those when you don't sleep well. This cortisol increases much more than it should. And then the hormone that's responsible for telling you that you need food, or that you're full. Like both of those two are not functioning optimally. So, I bet you could sort of recall a time where you had a very, very poor night of sleep and the cravings just went through the roof and you wondered why. That's definitely why. That's probably why those hormones are not functioning optimally. Therefore, those cravings just are speaking to you.
So then just to cover off some of the other areas there, like cognitive decline, as Marvin said, memory has issues. Maybe your productivity slacks at work. You've got the emotional and psychological effects. So how many of us are like snappy or very short fuse when we're tired, right? So that kind of creeps in. Equally, a big one, which to be honest, I really suffer from, is the immune system being suppressed, right? So if I am traveling, it's a long haul flight. I don't get any sleep because I'm, packed into economy class. Then it's a struggle because I miss out on my sleep. Yes, you're probably around more germs anyway. And so if I have that, then I'm more likely to, for the first couple of days of my trip, come down with a flu or something like that. So this is a big one, right? The immune system can be suppressed. It's working suboptimally. You get the chronic inflammation. It's harder for your body to recover. So if you're pushing hard with your training, you may be lower energy. It may impact your performance. You may fatigue faster than usual, and your risk of injury increases. If I think back to all of the times that I've been injured in the gym, it's generally because, or part of the reason is because I trained when I shouldn't have, because I was overly tired, maybe overtrained, under recovered, that have caused the issues there. So how do we improve sleep? I'll pass over to Marvin here for these three basics here. Again, nothing sexy, but all these things are like habits that you can put into place, behaviors you can try, and start gradually improving the quality and the quantity of your sleep.
By the way, I can attest to the immune system suppression. I think I've gotten sick more times in the last year than I have in the last 4 years combined, just because of, poor sleep with a new baby. But
So
getting
just
on
checking,
to,
you don't recommend having a baby. Is that what you're saying?
I'm not saying that, Pete. Right. So as we said earlier when we first started about how, we love actionable, direct, clear steps that we need to take to achieve a desired outcome. We want to get tactical, right? So we want to first master the three basics, which are, and we'll dive deeply into them individually, but consistency in your sleep schedule, controlling your sleep environment, and then optimizing your evening habits. All right. So with your consistency with your sleep schedule, you want to work backwards, right? So let's assume you want to sleep at 10 or you want to wake up at 6 a.m., right? You calculate, and for easy maths, let's say we want to get 8 hours. So you work backwards. You need to be in bed by 10 p.m., right? And now this doesn't mean that you are getting in bed at 10 p.m. It means you're falling asleep and you're knocked out by 10 p.m. Therefore, right, we want to set a nighttime alarm around 60 minutes before bed. Pete is definitely a proponent for this one, and I've definitely tried, well, before the baby, and it definitely worked, like it just helps you start to wind down rather than thinking, oh, okay, at, quarter to 10, I'm going to try and go to bed. No, it doesn't work like that. Lose the snooze. Wait, if you have to use your phone as an alarm, place it far away from the bed, because obviously now you're going to get up. Once you get up out of bed, you've gone to switch off the alarm. Chances are you're not going to go back to sleep. And then we want to keep the schedule as consistent as you can. Obviously, we want to be realistic, and we, again, to sound like not sound like a broken record. We don't want you to be robotic, right? Obviously, things are going to happen. You're going to have events. You're going to be up late for work and so on and so forth. But within your control, really try and stick to the same sleep and wake up times. And then onto the second one, which is controlling your sleep environment. This is obviously really important just to get your body and your brain and your mind ready and prepared for sleep. So you want to make your room pitch black, using blackout curtains, covering the LED lights, considering maybe even having like candles in your room before you, obviously, when you're getting ready for bed, and no lights. You want to set the room temperature between 16 to 19 degrees. For all you married people, I know that this is a constant fight between spouses of temperatures in the bed. I know my wife and I definitely fight about this one. But yeah, 16 to 19 degrees is the optimal temperature for sleep, just because your body responds much better to a cooler temperature and promotes deeper sleep. And then, as we said earlier, the blue lights, the phones, the screens, the TVs, we obviously want to limit those. So having the rule of no phones in the bedroom is honestly one of the best things you could ever do.
And
And
to be
then,
honest, just quickly from a sort of conquering your morning type point of view, right? For me, having my phone across the room is something that just helps me not kind of, turn off my alarm and then just start scrolling and have that like maximum input of essentially shit you see on social media start your day, right? So literally not looking at your messages, your WhatsApps, your emails, your social media for the first hour in the day, honestly, in terms of mood, has been such a big game changer as well. And how many times, have you caught yourself maybe your alarm's gone, you're in bed, you're on your phone, half an hour later, you're still flicking through reels. And from a point of starting your day on a high, that just doesn't do it. So, from personal experience, it is really powerful and potent in terms of setting your mood for the day to feel like you own your morning. And who knows, well, maybe we'll get some more early morning gym goers as well.
yeah, and getting that sunlight in the morning versus blue light, obviously then helps, bring up the cortisol the way that it should and, bring down the melatonin rather than spike your cortisol with, a screen in front of you. And then the last one of the basic one is optimizing the evening habits, right? So James Clear actually sort of made this famous, the 3-2-1 method, not necessarily these three, but that, format of having 3-2-1. You want to stop eating before bed, 3 hours before bed, no liquids 2 hours before bed, and then screens off 1 hour before bed. The stopping the eating 3 hours before bed is obviously to help your body digest food, like your body you don't want your body dealing with too many processes, digesting food, getting you ready for sleep, you overthinking all these things. The more you minimize the processes for the body, the better the sleep will be. No liquids is obviously to avoid getting up at night, going to the bathroom. This is definitely something I struggle with. Chugging, almost a liter of water, realizing I've barely had any water before bed, and then lo and behold, like clockwork at like 1 or 2 a.m. I'm up to go to sleep, and then I'm to go to the bathroom. And then screens off. We've already touched ad nauseum about this an hour before bed. Clearing your head. I mean, I know earlier in the beginning when we touched on some of the, things that people struggle with is just like your head is just things are happening in your head at night, probably because you're so busy, so hectic at work. And then this is sort of the only downtime you have. So then it feels like your body's like, okay, now this is the time to have all these other thoughts. And one thing that really works is actually just, like a brain dump. So writing down your thoughts, whether it's things that you're, thinking about, stress from work, maybe other business ventures or anything of that sort, to the to-do list for the following day. Just putting pen to paper really helps to, brain dump and get those thoughts out of the head. And then caffeine, this is a massive one, especially in Saudi. We have a massive coffee culture. We love coffee here. Absolutely nothing wrong with it. We love it. However, it definitely does impact sleep. So it has a half-life of up to 6 hours, which means even if you're not feeling the effects of the coffee, you're not feeling amped and ready to go and smash your squats. There's still an effect on your body that the coffee has, and so we want to limit that. After 2 p.m., we want to limit the coffees. And then, of course, alcohol is not really an issue here. But if you do drink, you want to stop 3 hours before bed because this also then impacts your sleep quality. You can't get into that deep sleep that we want because of alcohol.
Yeah, and I think a lot of time, just going back to the caffeine point, we think, and I've been guilty of this in the past, is like, I can have a coffee and sleep. No problem, it's fine. That's kind of not the point because, it's going to then interrupt how you go through those stages of sleep. So 1 to 2 to 3 to 4 into the sort of deeper REM type sleep. So even if you feel like, yes, it doesn't matter, like I can manage, like internally tells a different story. So, really try and pay attention to when you're having that coffee, why you're having it, if it's just out of habit, routine, can you swap for something else? Because ultimately that's going to then have a sort of a knock-on effect to the following day as well. So then to go, I guess, beyond the basics, there's some things here which some of them are going to be a little bit more of an uphill struggle, just in terms of, those people around you. A lot of the time, I was actually having a conversation with someone earlier, and, your partner is probably someone you spend the most time with in your life, and they have the most potential to affect your behavior, right? And so it is, if they are someone who isn't necessarily on the same journey as you, then that is going to make it tough. If they are someone who is on the same journey as you and wants to look after their health and improve and, focus on all these aspects, then that's going to be a really positive thing for you and your journey. And it's going to help things sort of move that much more quickly. So, on that, navigating late night culture, family gatherings, social gatherings. I'm sure a lot of you at times feel that you can't say no and you can't leave these sorts of things. And whilst, yes, there's going to be times where you probably have to suck it up and stay late, managing the expectations, managing the occasions is something that will definitely help that in some way. So, setting a soft curfew for yourself and making sure that you set that expectation with people saying, it's going to happen at this time. I'm going to leave because I've got this tomorrow. And you can make it up, right? The amount of times I've said, oh, I've got to go. I've got a training session at 6 a.m. tomorrow. And then people get it, right? So, it's okay to tell a lie once in a while. Create a wind down buffer as well. So even if you get home late, it's not about going necessarily straight to bed, but what can you do which will then kind of transition you into sleep mode? So, set the lights low, no screen activity before bed, start maybe introducing a sort of other things that, tell your body that it is bedtime, reading, shower, breathing work, whatever that might be for you. Reframe gatherings. So not everything should be a late night meetup, right? You can have earlier coffee catch-ups. You can have weekend brunches instead of always late nights. So you can do sort of take ownership of those social occasions and steer them more towards times which obviously are better suited to you. Coffee culture hacks. So time your last caffeine hit. So if you think about, okay, caffeine is going to stay in my system for 6 hours, 5 to 7 hours, then think about when is the last time you should have something. And it's not about, avoiding such occasions, but you can switch your drink preferences up. So for me, even if, I'm sort of going out late, meeting friends in a cafe, whatever it might be, sparkling water is my go-to. You can still enjoy the occasion and, you don't have to have a coffee with everyone. You can build this decaf ritual. I think this is probably becoming a little bit more seen in Saudi, decaf. I know not many places do it, but you can normalize that sort of, late night decaf, or even herbal teas are a good option to sort of still enjoy the occasion with friends, with family, but you're not smashing back shots of espresso.
And
Um,
something interesting as well, Pete, about the caffeine is if you're also having to have two, three, four coffees a day, it probably points to a larger issue, right? You are now having to rely on caffeine to give you energy, to keep you going. Sometimes it's not the social occasions, oftentimes it is, but sometimes it's not. And so, really ask yourself or check yourself, like, why do I need this caffeine? Is it because I don't have energy? Why don't I have energy? And you kind of work backwards. And oftentimes it comes right back to the topic that we're talking about tonight, and that's sleep. So, yeah, really interesting thing that happens there.
Janine's got something for passion fruit iced tea. It sounds great. It sounds
Mm.
good, Janine, but just see how sweetened it is, right? Because usually these sorts of iced teas have, I don't know, 5 tablespoons of sugar, if not more. So always ask for like an unsweetened version, or if they've got anything without sweet, like what is the popular one here? Like hibiscus, right? Kirkcaldy. That is good. A weird taste, can be totally overly sweetened. So hot climate, circadian rhythm, obviously heat pushes activity to later in the day. So what you can do is balance this out. So if you are able to get some sunlight exposure in the morning, then try, if it's through a window, if it's on a balcony, if it's just an outside walk, something like that. Strategic siesta naps. So if you are going to have a nap, think about like a power nap, not a kind of you're out for 2 or 3 hours, because that is going to wreck obviously, and impact the sleep later on that evening. And yes, avoid naps after 5 p.m. If you need a nap after 5 p.m., if it's after work or something, then it's probably because you are doing it out of habit. And also, it is probably something that is caused about because you're having that nap, right? Because if you're having that nap at 5 p.m., you're going to struggle getting to sleep that evening. Therefore, you have less sleep before you need to wake up to work, and then you need the nap again the following day. So it's always this snowball effect. Four, tech, one more episode syndrome. So
That's
something that I
funny.
found really beneficial for me is make barriers to behaviors, right? A lot of the time, because it's automatic, we do it out of habit. If we've got something in place that gets us to think about the behavior we're about to do, then that definitely helps us stay on track. So, I've mentioned this before. I use an app called Opal, which helps to just block certain apps at certain points in the day. So, for example, like if I set it to, bedtime or whatever it is, or pre-bed, then it will block all sorts of apps like email, WhatsApp, all these sorts of things that then, if I want to go into them, then it blocks it. So then it reminds me, okay, am I doing this out of habit and so on. So it's quite useful to use something like that, or even sleep mode on your phone to come on at a particular time. Marvin mentioned this about blue light filters. So make sure your phone is set to sort of night mode, and that will limit what is coming through the phone in terms of blue light. If you look at your phone, it's probably a bit more orange at a time. That's because the blue light has been taken away. And then I didn't even know this was a thing, Marvin, but you put this in saying you can set autoplay to off on things like Netflix. So it doesn't just play the next episode. So you need to obviously be a bit more conscious in making that choice to watch that next episode. Food and evening habits. Marvin was saying no food or limit food, big meals 3 hours before bed. Digestion can really be one of those things that interrupts or delays sleep. So, something smaller, whether it's something protein based, a Greek yogurt, something like that, can be fine closer to bed, but not something heavy that really sits in you. If you can't shift dinner earlier, as we mentioned, keep it lighter. Move your meals or your heavier meals to earlier in the day. And then hydration is important. I remember this actually during Ramadan. And for me, I was disregarding all of this at 4 a.m. I remember chugging water, getting all of my calories in, and obviously then having a shitter in terms of sleep. Also, another biggie, what do you do if you wake up at night? So don't check the time. This is going to maybe make you panic, maybe make you think. And anyway, your phone should be on the other side of the room. So you shouldn't be checking your time. You can look at implementing some sort of breathing technique, 4, 7, 8. So inhale for 4 seconds, hold for 7, exhale for 8. And this just helps you calm your nervous system some more and sort of ease back into sleep there. Don't lie there overthinking. I'm sure we've had this where thoughts are going round and round in our heads. Oh, have I planned this for tomorrow? Have I done this? Have I done that? What about this? Oh my God, I'm so nervous for this, whatever it might be. So if you are stuck in that loop and it's not going away, get up, write your thoughts down, and then go to bed, because that will just take them off and, take a load off and give yourself a reset. So sometimes you've probably had those times in bed where you are like, fuck, like I just cannot get to sleep. So can you almost put in like a false reset for your brain, or to have it feel like you're trying again in a different, fresh way? So for me, what I like to do is I flip the covers. So the covers are cold on one side, pillows as well. You can even brush your teeth again, change bedrooms if you have that luxury. It helps trick your brain into thinking that it can't sleep. And then final thoughts, just because I know we are sort of running over a little bit. We spoke about this at the beginning. You can survive on 5 to 6 hours sleep, but you won't be in a position where you're thriving. It's going to, the lack of sleep, either directly or indirectly impact your fat loss, your muscle gain, your mental clarity, your mood, and your long-term health. So I know it's one of those things that's always pushed to the bottom of the list, but really we should start thinking about pulling it more to the top of the list. There's no supplement, no diet, no workout that can overcome poor sleep. So it has to be a non-negotiable in some sort of way, as best as we can. And one of the big things from this really is to maybe, at the end of this, write down the top three things that you think you can implement, and then just start with the first one from today. Start small. Gradually, once you have nailed that as a habit, build in another one and then another one. But, as we always say, progress, not perfection. We want to start with the thing that is going to be least invasive or overwhelming for us. That may just be setting a pre-bed alarm. So doing the math and working out, okay, I need to get up at this time. What time do I need to sleep? And doing so accordingly.